Hello, hello, hello. Happy PCE Friday. How is everyone doing today? How is everyone doing? Good morning, Sterling. Good morning, Patrick. Hey, Richard. Yeah, we have all the numbers coming in. Sterling, put them in the chat. Thank you very much. John, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Mark. Let's see. Good morning to people. There's a lot of people in the background, but not a lot in the chat. Maybe we're watching on all the channels. Consumer spending higher than forecast because the cost of necessities non-discretionary. I think that's one of the things. And the savings rate is getting drained. Credit card usage is skyrocketing. So remember, people will do what they're going to do until they can't. So we had Exxon and Chevron earnings. Thank you for putting those in. Exxon was a beat on EPS, but a miss on EPS, but a beat on revenue. A pretty big miss on EPS. Chevron was a beat. Looking forward to a service for rules, as you mentioned yesterday. We're going to figure out something. Good morning, McRangers. So let's just go through the numbers. Again, mid-morning. It's after I kick off the morning today. Then it's heading to the DMV. My favorite thing, the DMV day. Oh boy. So not looking forward to that. Good morning, Jacob. All right, we had the PCE numbers coming in this morning. Higher than prior, roughly in line with forecasts, but coming in pretty. I think they're still fairly hot, but the market shrugging it off. Sterling put in something. Where was that? I don't see him cutting in. We'd have to have a massive drop in inflation going into the summer, and then to cut right in September, right before a massive election. I don't see him doing it. They either have to cut July or if inflation dropped, or cutting in November at the earliest. But these numbers, they start cutting into these kind of inflation numbers. It's not going to be good. So again, core PCE coming in at 0.3. Super core was also hot. It's not reported here, but super core was also hot. Core year over year 2.8 versus 2.7. The market's just shrugging it off because of Microsoft and Google so far. Had their earnings yesterday afternoon. The PCE month over month is 0.3 year over year. This is the headline PCE 2.7 versus 2.6. We still have consumer sentiment, the final numbers for April coming up, and the 5-year and the short-term inflation expectations. So that's 10 a.m. Eastern time. Do not ignore that time frame. So far, again, Microsoft up 3.6%, Google up 11.5%, Intel, which also reported yesterday, not missed on revenue, and that's down over 8%. And remember, we talked about Intel, and I'm expecting it to hit that 87.5 harmonic. But the rest of the chips in party on mode. Exxon down after earnings, Chevron down slightly. But your mega caps besides Meta, which released on Wednesday and sold off, your other mega caps holding in there nicely. Tesla, big pullback after a big rally yesterday. Getting back to that weekly rotation zone area. Comm services, technology, and consumer cyclical leading the way. Comm services, especially with Google. Fed Watch still says the first cut is most likely in September, but that's pretty close to even a pause. We'll see. I think the market's taking it. Even shrugged off the first quarter PCE numbers and the lower first quarter GDP numbers yesterday, and rallied back even before Microsoft and Google's earnings. Fear and greed still in fear. So, again, we already talked about the earnings. We talked about everything. So we have, I think, one more pretty decent week of earnings next week, and then it starts getting into, not so much what will really move the market, just move individual companies. All right, the S&P. The S&P after the bounce yesterday. By the way, the bounce, remember we were watching that The key levels coming right down at 62.5 and then bouncing yesterday. So on a continued rally, the key level, we're approaching that 50%, 51.48, so roughly 51.50. First target area, we're still against the daily rotation zone. If we pop above there and get back into neutral mode on the daily, it still has to close above 51.95 roughly to get it into short-term bull mode again. Other than that, this is just a corrective rally. Cycle's getting back to the top. Let's just see how also the shorter term harmonics look from the retracement. Let me pull off this flagging pattern, which was over yesterday. So roughly the key support level I'll be watching is about 5105 to 5100. 5105 to 5100. If that breaks, 5075 and then 5052 are the downside targets. Again, 5148, 5150. And then the next major target is not the. You can have a minor target. Well, I can have a minor target right around 5183, but 5195 is the key major target on any continued rally. Just be advised that cycles are getting back to the top. Now the weeklies, we are still headed down, but not yet rolled over. And you see here on the weekly, even if it pulls back today, it's going to be a green bounce week at the bottom of the rotation zone, which really sets up something. Last week's closing basis is key to watch moving forward, and then the low. And I'm not talking for this week. I'm talking to remember this area, because if this bounces and then rolls and we get a lower close than last week's close, that can be a sign that a significant top can be in. I'm not talking that you can't have bounce plays, but we may have put in a significant top, possibly for a few months, at least a couple months. So keep that in mind if we close below last week's close. If we break then below last week's low, we could easily see a return to some bigger pullback levels. The NASDAQ also, it closed below the rotation zone, but last week's close is still very, very key in the short term. Getting back to cycle topping area now. On any rally, 17,912 is roughly the first area. That's an area, not an exact number, of any bounce back target to the upside. We also have the hooking over 50 there, and just below that we have the top of the rotation zone on the daily. The level it has to get above, not necessarily for today, but even next week, is 18,110.50 on a daily closing basis to resume a short-term bull move. Other than that, it's in short-term bear mode, at least daily bear mode. Let me just get this going. Roughly, the key support I'll be watching going to the open is 17,650. And then not only do we have a gap to possibly fill, we have a harmonic cluster at about 17,565. The gap is 17,567.50. So that's my next key target should it really roll over. If you're trying to look at this on the shorter term basis, this is just way too ugly to use as a double top. But you see we have a single candle clear path down to that 17,566, 565 area. So that would be a key target I would look to the downside. See if anybody else is here, coming in here. Let's see. Good morning, Jacob. Good morning, Raul. Thank you for coming in the chat, Raul. Thank you. I don't know if you're new to this live stream or you've been lurking in the background, but thank you. I really appreciate when people type in the chat. Good morning, Legion Reaver. Hello, Charles. What else do we have? Do you consider these type of data point releases as tradable? I don't like to trade them at the exact release moment. I like to look for the setup after the release moment. Because right now you have to be really nimble to trade these things. So I'd rather do the post-release setups, personally. Good morning, Anissa. Also, your thoughts about Meta and Google instituting dividends for the first time? I mean, well, not much. I don't really have a lot of thoughts. They're not major dividends. So, I mean, it's a good sign, but that means they're just, I don't think they have a lot of areas, excuse me, to deploy cash right now. I mean, it's good for the people who want to sharehold in a long time. Good morning, Martinez. The Dow, no real bounce yesterday, coming back down to 62.5 and reversing nicely. So the levels I'll be watching are return to the 50 today, 38,132, and then 37,965. Below that, we have a cluster area of about 37.8. 37.8 to the upside. If it gets through this 38,470 area, we have the top of the rotation zone and a harmonic right at 38,635. We also have the daily cycles already rolling over on the Dow. The weekly, it's still, you have a closing area between the week of April 8th and the last week, so that's key. The close of last week was slightly lower, so I'm watching that on a closing basis. And we're actually, if the Dow sells off today and closes below last week, and especially closes below about 38,170, it could get interesting to the downside going into next week. The Russell had the little mini double coming, hitting first, second target, then spiking up yesterday. The Russell's still in somewhat of a rah-rah mode, trying to buy the old dip. I'm still watching that, caught on the 50% harmonic, 1970 and then 1956 to downside. I'm just giving the bigger levels on there. The major resistance area is 2020 on the Russell. The VIX, again, fears getting sucked out very quickly. No real fear jumping in today from the PCE numbers. So it's still 1650 before we can sustain more of a sell-off, or below 15 before we can really start watching for a more sustainable rally. The DAX, not much. The only thing, if you're a DAX bull, you still need the close above 18,377 to really get it into short-term bullish mode again. Other than that, it's consolidating with a flat rotation zone. So your breakdown level is still yesterday's low. The breakout level is that 18,377 area. The notes, interestingly enough, the futures, a little bounce, still holding the 75% harmonic, which means the yield still stalling out at that 75% harmonic right here, which it pulled back. I think the market's underreacting to these PCE numbers. They're just more focused on the earnings, but I'm watching it still. It's stalling. The only thing that changes it for me in the short term is if we close back below 4.5% on the 10-year yield. That's the only thing that makes me sit up and take notice, because we still have the probabilities to actually return to about 4.86 in the short term. Dollar index, still channeling, still holding the daily rotation zone, but it has to get back above 105.76 on a closing basis before it really resumes any bullish trend. Crude, gosh darn, little sell-off and then reversal yesterday, but its key resistance still has to get above 85.06 on a closing basis. It finally hit that 50% target after the percent beat buy, but with a tight stop that just dumped below that slightly. Still watching up here, but it has to get above that 85.06 before it really gets into bullish mode. On a loose stop, that would still be in play. Gold, still no trigger, still no downward close. It's confirmed with the double, but no trigger. So we're in a larger correction right now in gold. So still, based off this multi-week move, still roughly a sideways correction, and weekly cycles starting to roll over, but remember, you don't have to necessarily pull back much to have a correction. So far, this is a sideways correction. Other than that, there's not many short-term things to trade from my perspective. The key target area is about 2370 on any bounce. Sorry for the dogs in the background. The yen straight to 156.86 next harmonic. Again, the Bank of Japan spoke last night or earlier this morning, depending on your time zone, and didn't really announce any policy shifts to change their stance right now. So the yen continues to weaken, hitting that 156.86 target. The next target is 158 roughly. So the yen continues to weaken. The euro, the channeling of flag hitting the second target on the double and then reverse pulling back. So first and second targets hit. Other than that, not much to talk about there. Spiders, these good old Spideys. Right now, I'm still just looking at the harmonics unless we break above Wednesday's highs. If we break above Wednesday's highs, the next target is about 510.20. Other than that, I'm just using the harmonics. 505.80 is the key support. The key resistance is 507.37. Looking at 506.65. So if we get above that 507.37, 510 is the next key target. Other than that, I just use the retracement harmonics back on the way down. For the Qs, pretty much the same thing. Still using the retracement targets. Wednesday's high on any rally is key, about 429.73. Above there, major resistance, 431.80. About 431.50 to 431.80. The dogs are bullish. Well, the dogs are very excited for it being Friday. NQ yesterday morning put in a 15-minute potential double bottom at 10:45 Eastern that triggered, but NDX did not get to 75 retrace. Do you defer to the futures or to cash if that happens? Personally, I defer to the futures. Just because of the way they trade, I defer to the futures for intraday stuff. What else do we have? We had Tesla. Big rally yesterday, coming back to the weekly rotation zone. Remember, out of very oversold conditions. But this is starting to get into very key resistance. If it continues to march higher, 179. So I'm just watching for a rollover play there. There's nothing much. Then there'll be gap plays to the short term. On the daily, about 175 is pretty key resistance with the 50 and near this top of the prior resistance area. But there's no short-term rollover setup just yet. NVIDIA, remember, we still have the double in play. Now, the double invalidation point, since the stop's been lowered, it'd have to get above 892.27 on a closing basis, and we're nowhere close to that yet. So this double, even with bounces, can continue to play out. And by the way, this is not a double bottom. This is not a double bottom. So I'm still watching for the next rollover play in NVIDIA. We got Google. Which now we have to update. By the way, the double that never triggered was I just didn't remove it from the charts. But the next key level on Google was 168.60, trading 174. So at this point, we have to roll to the forward harmonics. And these are the long term, not the short term. So the next key target, if Google continues, is roughly 179. And if we use the short term, which is already going to be extended below, but this is where we can use them for support on any pullback. So the pullback window would be 167.6 to about 169.83. We have that. We have Microsoft. Microsoft still bouncing yesterday on the 62.5. And then the gap up today. So remember, 390 on any rollover, 390 is still very key for Microsoft to trigger. If we close below 390, and I'm not talking about today because it's going to take, might not close in the near term below that, but that's the key level that I have really alerted, because if we close below that, it shifts probabilities to at least a return probably to the 200 area, because it would be the 87.5 rule that's just above that 200 area. We have Intel also on the miss. Remember, we closed below the 87.5 back on the 19th. Okay, the next target area was roughly the 75 area, 31.37, which it's roughly trading 32 right now. And there's a fair amount of support in here. So I would not be surprised, but if this support to see some kind of little micro bounce in here, but we still have 28 as the key magnet price over the next while. Wow. Exxon earnings today. By the way, Exxon, this is not a double top. Did not get up high enough, you see here. Did not get above 122.09. Now, it's still, if you start getting back below 117, today I'm watching where it closes in relation to about 118.50. Because if it closes below there, it's closing below the rotation zone, and that would be the first close below the rotation zone since back in February. But if we really start closing below the low of Wednesday the 17th, 117.12, the next magnet area for me is back to 115. Chevron, which actually reported better than Exxon. Chevron, which reported better than Exxon after coming back down and stalling out at that 87.5 level. One of the things I'd really recommend, especially if you're newer to this channel, learn harmonics. They can really help. The key area for Chevron, because I flipped the harmonics around, 170.91 still on a closing basis. And you look how nicely that topped out with the prior area from back in September of last year. So that is very key resistance. So roughly 171 is what you'll be watching for on a closing basis. But this is in potentially another topping zone, again, between the 50 and the 62.5. Yeah, let's get to that. The Thomson Reuters Commodity Index. Here you go. It's looking bullish. The only thing, remember, to really get the run on, still has to close above roughly 301.20. The only thing that could put a damper on this in the short term, this is a valid double, is a close back below for a commodity pause and pullback would be a close back below 294.44. Also, copper. Look at copper. Aye, the coppers are getting it. The coppers are coming. Again, coming up to the next harmonic, 460. The next major level, 471, 472 area. All right, so this was roughly a little pullback to the rotation zone and the rotation back up. This, I mean, copper's a major industrial use. This is not deflationary or disinflationary. You were talking about commodities. Well, this is a key one to watch because of its importance in a lot of stuff with manufacturing. All right, and this is inflationary. By the way, silver not doing much after the pullback to the bottom of the rotation zone. It's got a lot of heavy lifting to do. We already talked about gold to really get in bullish mode. Let's go back to the S&P, looking at pre-market. Oh, one of my dogs is going crazy. One of my dogs is going crazy out there. Key resistance 51.15. 51.15. It has to start sustaining above that before I'll start watching that to turn into support. And then my first target area would be 51.30 in the short term today. If we continue to sell off, the major area I'll be watching is 50.96 to 5100 for a very key support area of the sell-off. If we come down and test that range into the open. Let's just see with the tick where that's opening today. The tick slightly bullish. Nothing substantial. So I'm going to be seeing what holds for support on this tick pullback. So that is very key. All right. I'm going to get all set for the open now. So if the tick pulls back, again, the key area is about this 50.96 to 5100 to watch for key support. The dogs are bullish, but, you know, I don't know if it's the day to be that bullish. It could be a choppier day today going into Friday, digesting a lot of stuff. I mean, also you had Microsoft and Google already on the major tear. But I'm going to be watching to see how it reacts if it does get into that pullback zone. Other than that, Coco, thank you for joining in. So you're still in higher high mode? Are we still going? We haven't hit that NASDAQ. Well, you raised it to 24, didn't you, Coco? Because you were at 18. You were at 18. We did not quite get there yet. So, are you ever in non-bullish mode, Coco? Other than that, thank you for tuning in. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I will be back in the chair on Monday to see everyone then. Bye for now.